Today I'm building a large shed at my house. Alright guys, so yes, I am building a shed here at my house. So as you can see, I've already got some of the wood delivered here. This is going to be for the floor system that's all pressure treated. So now we can take a look at where I'm building the shed. It's going to be to the left of my wood shed I built. This just stores my firewood for the year. So this is the location. And why am I building a shed when I have a huge garage? Great question. It's really to remove all of the dirty things from the garage, basically all the mowers. There's a go-kart, there's four-wheeler, dirt bike, things like that, there's really not a great place for them in the garage. And also they track a lot of dirt and mud through the garage, and I like to keep it a little bit cleaner, and it'll just be nice to put those things out here in a separate space. I've also got all of my like garden tools, shovels, rakes, chainsaws, all that kind of stuff in my garage. I'd like to free up a little bit more space in there, so that's why I'm building this shed. So as you can see, I already got started a little bit. I have the footers poured. I have them covered right now. It's good to cover that concrete for the first few days to keep the moisture inside. So basically I have a 3-foot deep footers. I had my friend, shout out to Steve, for coming over and drilling those holes for me with his tractor. Would have been impossible to do by hand. It's really rocky here. So we got most of them down about 3 feet, and then I filled that with concrete. I also then built some molds to create just a nice squared surface to then place my posts on. So I've got 6. The middle 2 are a little wider because I'm putting 2 posts on those, as you'll see in the design. And for size reference, this shed is 12 feet wide and 8 feet deep. So as you can see, we're actually going deeper than what that is. So we're going 12 feet deep here on the side, and then the length here is actually 24 feet. So this is a fairly large shed, I would say. Could really be considered a 1-car garage. You can definitely get at least a car in there with some extra length available at this end. So I've got 6 footers. I poured those about 5 days ago. They should be ready to go to at least start building. Seemed like everything set up pretty nice. I was able to do it in about 50-degree weather, and it had some time in that warmer weather before it got cold again. So that was pretty lucky being here in February, where we did get some snow, and I'm actually supposed to get a little more snow tonight. So as you can see, we are dealing with a pretty good decline here on the hill. So I kind of like this area because it was out of the way. It's also a pain to mow this anyway because it's kind of steep. Putting it right next to my other wood shed seemed to make sense, and it's pretty close to the house, so it's easy to get to. And also, if I want to run electricity to it, it won't be too far to run. So this is the location for the shed. Now we can head inside and I can show you the design. Alright guys, so here is the overall framing design for the shed. So like I said, we got 12 feet deep here and 24 feet long. And then I've got openings for a double French door here, 2 windows that are 2 foot by 3 foot, and then a garage door opening here that is 9 feet wide and 7 feet high. So now I'll roll it back and you can kind of see the basic process that I'm going to follow when building the shed. First off, I just showed you I've got the footers poured, roughly 3 feet deep, and these are 6x6 posts, and you can see I'm notching them to support the headers all around, and then even a notch on the ends for the rim joists. So I think this is a pretty strong way of doing it. It's very similar to how I did my loft in the garage. If you watch that video, I did the same thing with notching, and I've actually got a double deep notch here, so it's 3 inches deep because I'm going to be doing a double header. And so here you can see the headers that I'm talking about. So these are 2x10s and 12 feet long. So that's how you get the 24 doubled up, both sides, same thing. And then here you can see my floor joist going in. Again, 2x10s by 12 foot. Gonna cut a little bit off the end because I want the entire structure to end at 12 feet so that the plywood sits nicely. And then here you can see the rim joists I was talking about, so those will also sit on the post. And then I'm going to add the blocking, and this is pretty important for this span, a 12-foot span, to have some sort of blocking. Could probably get away with just a single row, but I'm going to do a double row, and I'm also going to have them perfectly aligned I didn't do that in the loft, and it's more important in this situation because I'm using regular 3/4 inch plywood, not tongue and groove, and the reason is because I already had 6 sheets of that, and I only need 9 for this project, so I'm gonna use that 3/4 inch I already had, and because it's not tongue and groove, you really wanna make sure you're supported right on all the edges, so that's where they will meet in the middle of this, this blocking. So that will be a nice setup to have my plywood supported on all the edges. So I will block it in a straight line, and the double blocking will give some great strength to the structure. And up to this point, everything will be treated. It will be somewhat exposed to the elements, mostly just these outer ones, which will eventually get painted once they dry out. But then the bottom of the structure is somewhat exposed to the ground, not touching in any way, but nice to have this whole structure be treated for longevity. And one other thing I'm doing, I'm going to double up this rim joist here, because this is likely where I'm going to be attaching a ramp to go into that garage door section there. So potentially some heavy vehicles like a side-by-side or something could be going up that ramp, and most likely will attach directly to this rim joist. So I'm going to double it up to help with the strength there, so it's not bending when I'm driving something up that. Now next, you can see I'm adding the 3/4 inch plywood. I am going to stagger it, so have the joints staggered in the middle, basically cut one in half and do it that way. Staggering it is always a little bit stronger. And then I'll get started with building the walls. So the walls will be pretty normal 2x4 construction, roughly 8 feet high, so similar to kind of a house construction here. I am going to do my headers for my door and windows out of 2x6s, help with some strength, and this will be kind of a load-bearing wall for the roof system as well. And so here's all the walls framed up. I am going to do a double top plate. That's going to help tie the walls together. And next I'll be adding the roof trusses. So I'm planning to just build some of my own roof trusses. They can be pretty simple here for a shed. As you can see, it's basically 2x6s, and these are 8 foot length roughly. Obviously cut, you have this cut here to sit on the top plate. Add some collar ties to the top of it and a support near the middle. I haven't exactly decided where I want that. You could go the whole way down to sit on the top plate, really known as a ceiling joist. Then they would need to be obviously 12 feet long. This is an 8 foot 2x4, so that might work out well and should be plenty strong for this structure. The only other thing to consider is if I want storage up in the ceiling, then I would want to put something down right on the top plate. So I might just start with it like this, and then in the future, if I want to add storage somewhere, maybe I will add some ceiling joists in a certain section. And then from here, I was considering what kind of roof I was going to do on this. I thought about doing shingles first, but then after thinking about it, shingles are kind of a lot of work. You got to do all of the sheathing first, plywood sheathing. Then you got to put paper down, then you're nailing all of the shingles individually, so it's just a lot of labor. And I'm pretty comfortable doing the metal route, and that's how my entire house is, and that's how I did the wood shed. So in order to do that, it's a little more simple because you basically just put these purlins on, which will also, add some rigidity to the structure, similar to how you would add plywood. And then from there, you can just add on the metal roofing in sections. They usually come 8 feet by 3 feet, so it works out perfect because I set this up to be like an 8 foot span here, and then I'll need basically like 9 of them to get across because I am doing this flying rafter, I guess you call it, out here to add eave all around the structure. I think that'll add to the cosmetics to it and be nice to have a little more weather protection on the end and the sides here. So this is the overall design, but obviously we've got to start from the bottom. We're going to start with those posts and go up from there. So my main goal first is to get the entire floor system built. This is all pressure treated, so it'll be fine out in the weather, and then I can more so kind of plan around the weather to start doing all of the untreated sections. And just to give you a little bit more of a visual, this is roughly what it's going to look like. I used a free online kind of shed builder, but the one major difference here, these are 7 foot walls, because that's kind of more of a standard shed height, but I'm going to do 8 feet. Also, this has virtually no eaves or overhangs on the roof, and I'm gonna have about a foot all around. This also shows shingles, and I'm gonna do the galvanized metal. But as far as colors go, I think this is what I'm going to do to somewhat match the house. So this is the end goal. Let's see if we can make it happen. Alright guys, so I've got the floor system all built up here. First part was getting the posts cut, and shout out to Austin for helping with that. That's really hard to do by yourself, so it was nice to have two people to get these posts cut and figure out exactly what height they needed to be cut out to make everything level. So we got everything nice and level. Basically started on this side with this post. I knew this was my high point, and went out from there, basically making sure everything was level along the way. We went down and then we went across, kind of mocked up the whole perimeter just loosely, so that way we could make sure we knew exactly where the post bases had to go on the footers. So we mocked it all up, and then we actually took it down so we could drill and secure the post bases with the anchor bolts. So that all went pretty smoothly. One of the more time-consuming parts was doing all the notching in the 6x6 posts. So these middle ones are exactly the same because the concrete pad is level, but then yeah, the corners all are different. So they have the notch for the rim joist, and then the basically a double notch for the double header here. So once we had all the posts cut, I was able to do the rest by myself pretty easily. Started with these headers, so I did glue them, and then I also added nails to tie them together really well. And like I showed in the design, I've got this double rim joist here, and now you can really see how much of an incline this is on. So it's about a 3-foot drop from the front to the back. And as you saw, I did have all the joist hangers on the headers before I put them in. Since I did know I was doing this by myself, that's kind of the easiest way to do it. Have all the hangers on there, and then I can just cut all my joists down and then place them in pretty easily. And then once I got all the joists in, I moved on to this blocking that is all aligned like I showed in the design. So that really wasn't too bad, just a lot of cutting. So now from here, it's a lot nicer because I don't have to worry as much about leveling everything, because now I've got a great level base to work with. And so next up, we're gonna start on the untreated parts, which is gonna first be the flooring, which is the 3/4 inch plywood, and then from there I can move on to creating the walls. I did kind of split those up into 8-foot sections so I can actually build those in the garage. Same goes for the roof trusses. I pretty much know what they're gonna look like, and I need to build 12 identical ones so I can do those over in the garage and get prepped to assemble it all out here. Alright guys, so I got all of the walls built here. These are all the 8-foot sections for the longer 24-foot walls. So I did those in 8-foot sections. I got all of the roof trusses built here. Basically I could cut one side of the rafter and then trace it onto all the rest. So I needed to make 26 of the rafters to then make 13 full trusses. And then I also built the 12-foot walls here. So they were still out of the 8-foot sections, but then I combined them. I have them temporarily screwed together so we can carry them over there and put them up. So today is the big day to get out there, and first we're gonna put on the plywood flooring, and then we can get to putting all of the walls in place. Alright guys, so here it is. We're all finished up. And it has been a while since I've gone through anything as far as explaining what I was doing. So I was going to go through everything with you real quick right now. So we can step inside the shed here. So as I showed before, I built all of the walls and the trusses inside the garage. That worked out really well. I was able to do that actually while it was raining. So I could get all those ready inside. And then once we had some good weather, we could come out here and set everything. So we started with the walls. We started on this back wall. These are very simple walls because there's no doors or windows. So we started from the left and went to the right. As you can see, this is where the 8-foot section ended. That's why it's doubled up there. So the plates stop right there too. So we basically just brought it out in the 8-foot sections and stood them up. And I should also mention we did the 3/4 inch plywood for the floor first. And everything lined up really well. It landed right on that blocking that I put basically right here and then right here. But I really did make sure that the whole floor system was really square before we even started to put the plywood on. So then once we got the back wall in, we did the side wall here. Pretty simple. That I did have all as one piece. I braced it together so that you could see the 8-foot section ended there and then there was like a 4-foot section. But we brought that all out in one piece and stood it up. Then I could move on to the front wall where we have the windows and doors. Again, same thing, just stood them up, trying to make sure everything was staying pretty square. It was a really nice way of doing it because they were manageable sections. And then once you stood one up, you could kind of tie it to the other one by screwing them together here. So we really got all of the walls up in one day. And then the next day we moved on to the trusses. We started at that far end and then worked our way this way. What really did help is I set all of these hurricane ties first, so that way I knew exactly where they had to set. Then we kind of lean them against there and I could basically toenail both sides, so then later I could go back and actually add all of the nails into the hurricane ties. Once all the trusses were set, we added the purlins. Very straightforward. Normally these are about 2 foot on center. I think it was a little bit more for me because I wanted it to line up just so it was right below the ridge there so that I had room for the venting and everything. And I do want to give a big shout out to Austin for helping me out with the setting of the walls and the trusses. That really would have been impossible by myself. So it was great to have some help doing that. And then from that point on, I could basically do the rest of the structure by myself. And then as far as framing, the only other thing I really added after the fact, after I brought everything out, was the framing up here, just all of these verticals to support the siding that's on the outside. So I basically just matched, you can see the 2x4s. So those are basically 16 on center to have some great support for the siding. So then once I had the trusses and the purlins up, I could move on to doing the roofing, and I wanted to get that done as soon as possible because that way at least the entire structure wouldn't get wet when it rained. You can see I just put a screw in each purlin, basically after each ridge of this roofing. The interesting part is making sure that you are screwing it down enough, but not too much that you're over compressing the rubber gasket. But once I got going, it really wasn't too bad. It's really just a pain of doing it all by myself, carrying the roofing up, setting it up there, and then just crawling across all of the trusses and trying not to fall off the roof. Once I had both sides on, I then did that ridge cap, pretty standard, off-the-shelf item. I think it came in 10-foot sections, so I used 3 of those up there. So then after the roofing, I moved on to the siding. So this is pretty basic T111 siding. It did come already primed, which is pretty nice. It comes in 4x8 sheets, just like plywood. I will say this was kind of a pain to do by myself. Once I got going, it wasn't bad, but I did start right here in the window section. So just kind of a lot to line up. I was trying to basically butt it up here against the rafters. So just keeping that nice and then also keeping the seam nice. So basically right where you have 2 sheets come together here. If you don't have this perfect, you would really see it. But if you do get it right, you really don't notice the seam at all because it kind of blends in. So just like everything, it started out slow, but then kind of got the hang of it. And then of course, once I got onto the side here, it was a little easier. I didn't have to butt up to the rafters. And I did use a Z-channel there, and that was because I had the end of the sheet right there because that's 8 feet, and then I had all the gable sheets up there. So that was just to prevent any water from basically coming down that sheet and then going in and behind the bottom sheet. So that Z-channel just kind of channels the water so that it doesn't get inside the building. And then we'll walk around here. You can see the back is really basic because there's no doors or windows. That went pretty quick, but the pain of it is that it's pretty high. But as you probably saw, I screwed blocks onto the headers here to help me kind of hold the sheets while I then went up on the ladder to do all of the securing. And once I got all the T111 siding on, I could move on to painting. So I did go around and do all trim painting first, and that was pretty much all inside the grooves here to get all the grooves done, and then I could roll the rest. If I were to do this again, I'd just probably try to get a higher nap roller and just do all of the grooves with the rest of it. I think if you get a high enough nap, that would probably work out okay. So I ended up with 2 coats on the whole thing. I did do 1 more coat, so I got 3 coats on the front here. And once all the painting was done, I could move on to mounting the door and the windows. Did the door first. It wasn't too bad, but it was kind of awkward because, you know, you have to move the whole thing as one unit because it's basically pre-hung. So kind of heavy and awkward to move into place. Once I got it in place, it's just a matter of shimming and everything from the backside to make sure everything's operating smoothly. And I did build a whole pan, as you saw, for the bottom, because apparently that's the right way to do an exterior door. So if any water comes down anywhere around the door, it basically catches in that pan and runs out of the building, not in. And then the windows were pretty straightforward. Like I said, these are 2 foot by 3 foot. I had my rough opening the right size, so basically just putting it in, nailing it at the proper spots. You do a little bit of shimming underneath, make sure it's not sitting directly on the sill, make sure it's level. Pretty easy, first time ever doing windows. And then I moved on to doing the rain gutters because I knew once I had this nice white paint on the front, I didn't want it splashing up because it was getting a little bit muddy here in front. So if I didn't want all that white paint getting dirty, I did go with the vinyl setup instead of the traditional aluminum. And I had exactly 0 experience with gutters and downspouts, but I will say the vinyl went pretty smooth. All of the connectors already have gaskets in them. I still use sealant just in case. So then you can pretty easily cut it to length. I just use the oscillating multi-tool. And I did get a little bit of a pitch on here. They suggest something really small, like 1/8 of an inch over 10 feet, which is hard to even follow. So I just roughly tried to pitch it down to the downspout here. And then again, all of the downspout is also vinyl. So really easy to work with. Brought it right down here, and then I kicked it right back and brought it through the black corrugated tube the whole way out, back past all the footers right here. And you can see this line here. I did not do gutters on the back side. Really wasn't too worried about it here. The actual siding is pretty far off the ground, so it's not going to splash up. And the other reason to do it on the front was so that when you're trying to get in the building, if it's raining, you're not getting poured on with water. So then I moved on to the garage door. Pretty straightforward. It was my first time ever doing a garage door, but you can just follow their instructions and worked out pretty well. I was lucky I could get these brackets to line up with a truss in a decent spot, so I didn't have to really add any framing. I think I added just a tiny little block there just for a little bit more support for where I screwed that bracket in. But that was nice, didn't need to add anything. If I do want to add an opener in the future, I can, but I will probably have to add some type of framing in this area. Then the last big project of this shed build was doing all of the ramps. So I built them, as you saw, out of 1.5 by 4 inch steel tubing. So I will say these are completely overbuilt for what they need to be, but I do like to weld, so I thought this was kind of a good solution. That way I don't have pressure treated lumber coming right down into the ground there. Won't have to worry about it ever rotting. And so I thought it was kind of a cool solution to be able to build the ramps. So this small one was very basic. It's about 6.5 feet wide, so it's a little bit wider than the door, and then it's about 6 feet long this way. And that worked out really nice. Since I was already on a hill here, so the way that worked out is it's almost like kind of level, so it's really easy to walk right in there. Both ramps I did 24-inch spacing for what I would call the studs. I started out with a design at 16-inch, and then once I got the material, I was like, wow, that's going to be way overkill. So even at 24, I think it's overkill. But using this 3/4-inch plywood on a 2-foot span, it doesn't really flex at all. So the first ramp was really easy. The second ramp was not nearly as easy. So I kind of debated on what shape I wanted to make this. At first it was going to be straight off the building and come down. But even at 12-foot length, it would have been very steep. So that's why I basically had it turn this way a little bit, so that way it doesn't need to be nearly as steep. And so basically this side is still 12 feet. This side is more like 5 feet. So it ended up being almost a perfect trapezoid. Like this side is 9.5, and this side is almost the same, like 9.5, and then 12 foot, 5 foot. So I was able to roughly get those dimensions by just using some 2x4s and setting them up here, there, and there, taking measurements on all the angles, and that's what kind of gave me the shape that I wanted to make. Still the same 1.5 by 4 inch tubing. I did add some bridging just on the first two here, as you saw. And then also where the plywood splits lengthwise, I added angle iron on both sides of the rectangle. So there, and then also there. So that was just to give a little bit more support in that seam, so that way I didn't need to screw right on the very edge. I could kind of go in some from the edges, so it's a lot better supported there at those seams. And I didn't worry about these horizontal seams. All I did was I added blocking behind here so that they're basically self-supported by the adjacent sheets. Then both of the ramps use heavy-duty hinges that I welded on to the frame itself, and then it's secured to the building using some 1/2-inch bolts that bolt the whole way through. So basically the double header here and the double rim joist here. So this large ramp has 5 hinges and the smaller one has 3. And the reason I used hinges is so that I didn't really have to worry where the ground ended up, and that would have been really hard to try to like calculate what that angle needed to be. And also because there's no footers for the ends of these ramps, so theoretically these could move in relation to the shed. The shed has footers that should not move with frost, but the ends of these ramps may move up and down a little bit depending on the time of the year and the frost. And I just painted those frames with a roll-on Rust-Oleum coating. Pretty simple, just rust protection. But I mean, these are basically 1/8-inch wall tubing. They're gonna be fine for a very, very long time. And also to get this ramp into place was a little challenging because I think it's probably close to 500 pounds. But I did put casters on the bottom temporarily, and I rolled it down here. I had a safety strap to this post so that it didn't get away from me, but I got it right into position, and then I could lift up that back corner onto some blocking, temporary blocking I put up. But then I did dig out where it actually hits the ground here so that it wasn't like spaced up at all on both ramps, so that it's sunk down in and nice and flush with the ground now. And for now, like I said, this is just 3/4 inch pressure treated plywood. I do think when it dries out, I'll do something with it, maybe stain, maybe paint. The problem with paint though is once it starts chipping, you're gonna be constantly painting it. So thinking about a stain, maybe just a clear coat. So let me know what you think about that option. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy with how the ramps ended up. Like I said, very gradual on both of them, really easy to get up. And I shouldn't have any problem taking anything up here, 4-wheeler, dirt bike, or mowers. And the last thing I added on this ramp was a little guard here on the side. So this is just a 2x10 that I bolted right to the side. I used the same wood to metal screws, so they're actually self-drilling, which worked pretty well on the face here, but on the side I did pre-drill them just to make it a little bit easier. So I've got those every 16 inches, I got 2 of those. So this is just a little guard so that just in case you don't drive right off the side of that, because it does get a little high there at the top. And then here I basically built my own jamb. So what I did was I placed some 3/8 inch plywood in here just to give it a little bit of height so that I could have a bit of a grade going out. So basically the seal of the garage door can come down right here, and then I've got a grade out so that the rain can come down and go out of the building. So then to get things finished up, I could work on all the trim. I built the corners off on the sawhorses and then put them up. That was a pretty easy way of doing it. And all of the trim I did kind of use silicone all around to try to keep the rain from getting in. And I also did the same. I built the shutters first and then put them up, and that worked out pretty well. So I've got the shutters and the trim around the door and the garage door in the gray. So I think it was called Horizon Gray. So give a little bit of a contrast so that it's not just all white. And all of the trim is PVC. My first time ever using PVC. a bit overkill for a shed, but at least I won't have to worry about it rotting. And then one of the last things I did was add this diagonal bracing here on the corners. So it was probably a little bit overkill again, but since I have some height here, this will just prevent any potential twisting. Like if you would drive something pretty heavy up there and then hit the brakes, something like that where the whole structure might want to twist a little, this will prevent that from happening. So I just attached those with 3/8 inch lags, as you can see, and on both corners. And then the last thing I just did was add the stone around the shed. So this is pretty much the same stone that I have around my house. You also may have seen I did it around the outside shower out back. So that's just a nice way of finishing off the build. And also this way it's going to be a lot easier to mow around. You're not trying to mow right up against the building. It'll also keep it from getting muddy. And I did kind of wrap it around here a little bit. I have a bit of a swale here between my wood shed and the new shed, and I went around the wood shed a little bit as well. So that is the shed build. Overall, this took me right on about 2 months to do, and that was working on it 4 days a week roughly full time, and then some other nights as well. And total cost is right around $9,000 for everything. If you were to buy a 12x24 shed, it would likely be about the same from what I could tell, $8,500 to $9,500 for a 12x24. But for me, for this area, I would have then had to also grade all of the ground here because it's not level, or I would have had to build this floor system anyway, which was about $1,200 of the budget. So for me, if I bought a shed, it still would have cost $10,000, $10,500. And I do think I ended up with a nicer product here. Normally when you buy sheds, there are no eaves at all, and I did 1-foot eaves all around. There's definitely no rain spouts. They are usually 7-foot walls, and I did 8-foot walls here. And I think just in general, I kind of overbuilt the entire structure. 2x6 roof trusses. Normally if you buy one, it would just be a 2x4 type truss. So I think just in general, it's a lot stronger. And again, if I bought something off the shelf, I still would have had to figure out, how am I doing the ramps? How am I dealing with all of this incline and things like that? And overall, I think this was a really great experience. I did learn a whole heck of a lot. I had never done most of the things that I did here. It was definitely my first time installing a roof, installing gutters, first time I did windows and an exterior door. So next up for the shed, I can actually start putting everything inside it. So that's gonna be a go-kart, 4-wheeler, dirt bike, any mowers, all that type of stuff. But then next up, I will need to be building some shelving, get some nice storage solutions in there. And I do think I will eventually run electric to this. I wasn't going to at the start, but I know it would be really nice to have some lights and outlets in there. So that is the shed build. Let me know what you guys think of the finished product.